I mean, it's not so unreasonable to notice that a dream at night is like the movie that you play in your head. And it's not unreasonable to note as well that the dreams that you have at night bear a relationship to the daydreams that you have during the day. It's a form of cognition. It seems like an involuntary form of cognition, though, and that's a very strange thing. So Jung thought about the dream as nature speaking of its own accord, roughly speaking. And so his idea was, well, when you sleep, you dream, but the dream happens to you. It's not something that you create the way that, and you don't even think about creating it. Because I might say, well, what are you thinking about? And you'll say, I'm thinking about whatever it is. And you'll take credit in some sense for thinking that because it seems like a voluntary activity. But what happens at night is that you think, but you think involuntarily. And so what Jung would say is that means that something is thinking in you. And that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it. And this is one of the things that's uncanny about the psychoanalysts, is they were willing to take their observations to their logical conclusion. There are things that think in you. What are those things? And what are they thinking? And why are they thinking it? Now, if you do dream analysis, and this is a tricky thing, because who's to say if your damn analysis is correct, right? It's very difficult to understand that. If you do dream analysis with someone, you generally have them lay out their dream. And then you ask them when they're going through their dream a second time, they lay out their dream and you can kind of get a picture of it. And then they lay out their dream a second time, and as they go through it, every time they mention a detail or a character, you ask them what that reminds them of. And the hypothesis is that the dream is presenting an image or an idea that's associated with a network of ideas, and that if you can expand on the network of ideas as you go through the dream, you can elaborate on the dream, you can expand it upwards, and you can start to see what it might be attempting to put forward. Now, Freud's idea was that the dream knew what it was doing, but that its content was being suppressed and oppressed by an internal censor. So the dream had to be sneaky about what it was saying because it was going to deliver a message that the person didn't want to hear. And that was tied up with his idea of repression. But that's not Jung's idea. See, Jung's idea was different. He said, no. The dream is trying to tell you what it's trying to tell you as clear as it can. That's just the best it can do. And so you could think of the dream, and this is, I believe, the right way to think about it. The dream is the birthplace of thought, the same way that artists are the birthplace of culture. It's exactly the same process. It's that your mind is groping outward to try to comprehend what it has not yet comprehended. And it does that first by trying to map it onto image. And it's doing that in the dream, and it's somewhat incoherent. And well, let's stick with incoherent, because it's not yet a full-fledged thought. It's the birthplace of thought. It's a fantasy about what might be. And then if you can grip the fantasy and share it with other people, then maybe they can elaborate upon it and bring it into being with more clarity than it would be if it merely existed as the precursor of a thought in your imagination. Now, because Jung's idea too was, okay, you think in words. Where the hell do those thoughts come from? Well, they just spring into my head. Well, that's not much of an answer. They just, pop out of the void? Is there some sort of precursor to the development of the ideas? Is there a developmental pathway? So here's an image. This is the Buddha. There's calm water. There's a lotus. The roots go all the way down to the bottom of the lake. It's dark down there. The roots are embedded in the dark substrata at the bottom of the lake. The plant moves upwards towards the light. The water gets lighter and lighter as you move upward with the root. The flower manifests itself on the surface, and the Buddha sits in the middle. That's an image about how ideas develop. They come out from the bottom of reality, and they push themselves up towards the light, and they blast forward, and something emerges as a consequence. That's what that image means. And it's an image. The gold Buddha that's sitting in the middle of the lotus is an image of the perfect person. You could think about the gold Buddha who sits in a triangle as exactly the same thing that's the eye on the top of the pyramid. These are all the same ideas. And what's the idea that's trying to burst forward? How to be in the world. Well, what other idea would burst forward? Because it's the only problem that you really have. Right? How should you manifest yourself properly in the world? It's everyone's question. It's the ultimate question. It's been the ultimate question since the beginning of time. And we've been working out that idea forever. First of all, merely by acting it out, and then by representing the actions, and then by representing the representations, and spiraling all that together. So I started looking developmentally. I thought, okay, maybe these ideas have roots, and this was partly predicated on the observation from Dostoevsky and Nietzsche and so forth, that there did seem to be a necessary pattern in morality. There seemed to be a necessary pattern. It wasn't arbitrary. It was a representation of the specific mode of human being. And it isn't something that's just imposed on you by your culture. It's not something that's just learned. It's intrinsic in you, and it's manifest in the culture at the same time. And there's a there's a dialogue between those two things, culture and nature, where the idea is embedded, trying to make the proper articulation of that spring forward in each individual. And that's only to say these aren't radical propositions. Your nature strives so that you can manifest yourself properly in the world. Culture strives to aid you in that endeavor. Is there something about that that's of dubious validity? What else would it be doing? Working for your death? Hardly. Working for your destruction? Well, you could see that maybe when culture becomes pathologized, but to the degree that it's able to maintain itself across long periods of time, it obviously has to be striving in some way for your individual manifestation so that you can survive and flourish. So there's a co-creation of the human being going on through nature and through culture, and then perhaps with your own voluntary will participating, whatever the hell that is, something we don't understand at all and are prone to dismiss because of that.